It's the County Conversation, the Cricketers' weekly podcast covering all things UK domestic cricket. This week we have me, Cameron Ponsonby, and I'm joined by Nick Friend from The Cricketer and Chief Operating Officer of the PCA and former Worcestershire captain, Daryl Mitchell. On this episode, we will be talking about the PCA survey that has shown that 81% of players have concerns about the physical toll of the fixture list, and that 76% are worried about unsafe travel, what that means, why it's important, and how it could change the shape of domestic cricket in the future. But we'll start with the very sad news that I'm sure everyone listening to this show will have heard, that Josh Baker, the Worcestershire spinner, died last week, aged just 20. Daryl, your last season as a professional at Worcester was Josh's first. What were your memories of him as a player and as a person?
Yeah, obviously I'd known him a year or two before that as a sort of an academy kid, playing a bit in the second team and being around the professional ranks. But yeah, I remember him coming into the team. Really sort of bubbly character, actually. Life and soul in the dressing room was quite unusual as an 18 or 17-year-old kid. I think he was on his debut. I was obviously at the opposite end of the scale in terms of cricketing career, so we hit it off pretty well, really. He's a great character, infectious character in and around the rooms, real confident lad, which probably bore into him being successful and getting first team opportunities at such a young age. I remember getting 50 at Lords, which was a pretty special moment, and all the lads loved that, being on the Lords balcony. Yeah, and obviously with his whole life and whole career in front of him, we were expecting big things, and I guess it sort of puts into perspective everything that we were just about to talk about, I suppose, in some ways, in terms of scheduling, etc. When tragic news like that hits you pretty hard, I think you just feel pretty numb and pretty helpless in truth, and not being able to do much to help anyone about it.
It's obviously like an incredibly difficult time for a lot of players. You mentioned there about trying to be able to help people. If players are after support from a PCA perspective, is there any help that you can offer from that side?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ian Thomas is our director of personal development and welfare. He sort of heads all that up. We got a partner called Sport and Chance, which is Tony Adams's charity. I don't know if you've come across it, but
Yeah.
that's been going a number of years, and they do all our sort of mental health provision and things like that. So we were able to get grief counsellors on site at New Road first thing Friday morning, which I'm not sure how much they were utilised. Obviously, it's still everyone's pretty much in shock at that point. But so in the first sort of instance, getting people on the ground there, our personal development manager Lindsay would have been there as well all day, and then obviously that's sort of take that through the whole sort of grieving process, if you like. That support will remain in place now for as long as it's required, essentially.
And as you said before, kind of what we're about to talk about kind of pales in insignificance. Everyone at the Cricketer obviously wishes their best, sends their best even to all of Josh's friends and family. But to go from things that matter to things that, well, don't really. As mentioned at the top of this show is about the schedule and the kind of survey and the unprecedented kind of collective call for action that players have put out, basically saying, this isn't working for us. We don't like it. We want change. Nick, I'm actually going to come to you first. You covered this extensively over the winter. This is just players kind of moaning about having to do too much work and wanting to have a few more days off, isn't it? Like, why should we care? And where are we at? What's the status quo?
I think you have to care because the players are the players of the game, aren't they? The players of the players of the game's principal asset, and I think you've got them talking on two main fronts: player welfare and high performance. And it's not as simple to say as that players just want to play less and they want to want to spend more time playing golf and whatever the misconceptions and sort of the cynical responses out there might be. I mean, I've written far too many words on this for 6 or 7 months, often in one article. But that has come from speaking to 6-7 dozen of them. Like it's it's not isolated. I think that's the point. I think that's the main point I wanted to make. That this isn't a couple of players, and it's not. But it's also not players coming together and saying, if we all say the same thing, we'll get more time off. Like that's not. It's about the travel. We'll get to the data, but the travel points made with the survey results as well. It's the bits that we don't see as people outside the dressing room, getting from ground A to ground B because you've played here at 11 p.m. one night and you're playing there at 6 p.m. the next night, or is in a couple of cases this season you're playing a Blast game at 6:30 somewhere and you play a Blast game at 3:30 somewhere else the next day, and it is elite sport, and that's not how many elite sports work, particularly in elite sports where you don't necessarily have big sleeper coaches and I guess everything on the ground to make sure that players are sort of as refreshed as they can possibly be. And so that's the welfare bit, but the welfare bit works hand in hand with the performance bit, and you don't get one without the other. And if players aren't sleeping, if you're not getting to bed until 3 o'clock and 3 in the morning, then you've got to be back in the ground at 3 in the afternoon to effectively get ready to go again. What we know of restorative sleep is that you're not getting that, and if then that breeds into performance. You end up with essentially a watered down product. I think Blastoff features Warwickshire playing what's effectively the Blast's new showpiece, launch game, but they're playing the previous night at Durham. So you're asking people to present themselves at their best to launch the county showpiece tournament, the tournament that's been played on specific days because the counties rely on it so much. But at the same time, you're asking them to do that having gone and done their longest away day the night before, got back on the back of a 7-match Champo batch as well. No one is fresh, and you're not getting the best cricket out of it. And so I'm sure we'll get far more interest. That is one very small strand of this sort of far wider issue. But I think what's really important is that there is data attached, and there is now data attached. I think what we've seen in the last couple of years, that anecdotal evidence on its own is not necessarily sort of pushed at the door, or it's pushed at the door without opening it. But data, hard numbers, sort of player consensus, I think I'm sure I hope Daryl will agree, is a really significant step in what has been, a subject that has not always been debated in a particularly adult fashion. But I think having hard numbers there to present are really significant.
I think that's a good point. And with Daryl, what my question would be, what sparks this? I think it was Nick who told me kind of anecdotally before the show that whether this is true or not, you go back to the 60s or whenever the PCA's first kind of player meeting was, and the complaints would have been like, the umpires are rubbish, there's not enough money, and the schedule's broken. And you go forward however many decades, and it's probably largely the same. So what was it that sparked this kind of survey in particular? And what are you hoping it will change, that now you do have these numbers attached to it rather than just the anecdotes?
Yeah, just for clarity, I wasn't there in the 60s. I've been at the PCA a reasonable amount of time, but not quite back at the...
you take the minutes.
Yeah. I think from our side, this is something that, I've been played for the best part of 20 years. It's something it's been in the background forever, really, hasn't it? The county scheduling and what should be played when and how much cricket should be played, etc. But I think it's sort of bubbled to the surface for us. Although it's been ongoing conversations for a couple of years, I think it really bubbled to the surface for us at the PCA Summit this year. So the player reps, which is one rep from every county and the women's regions as well. But this specific topic obviously is centred on the men's game. Really challenged us actually and said, what are you doing about it? What is happening? They got a sneak preview of the forthcoming fixture list from Alan Fordham at that same meeting. And whilst there was relative optimism around the championship early on by everyone getting a bye week in that sort of weeks 4, 5, and 6, I think it is. That was pretty.
They're
positive.
gone now, aren't they?
Yeah, that's finished now. That was positive because I think in previous years players had been playing sort of 7, 8 weeks of county championship cricket on the trot, which we sort of pushed back on behind the scenes. So that was accepted, and then obviously they flashed up what the blast might look like, and I think that certainly shocked a few. There's a few looking at those blocks of how much cricket in certain periods and how many back-to-back games number going up in particular from 30 odd to 50 odd. I think I haven't got the number in front of me, but there's a significant increase in the number of back-to-back games. That obviously coupled with the travelling actually led to a little bit of anger, I think, in some parts of the reps group on behalf of their players in their dressing rooms. And we were challenged really, what are you going to do about it? What can we do about the schedule? So I think the first step for us really was trying to understand exactly what players want, because, like you say, anecdotally, everyone moans about the schedule without really having a solution. So what we wanted to know is exactly what the majority of players thought. Obviously, we've got a lot of different types of cricketer now. You've got your red ball specialists who actually are quite aligned to actually members on their thoughts in terms of don't want the championship book ending and want to play more in the summer, etc., etc. You got your multi-format cricketers who play everything, who get wheeled out day in, day out throughout a county summer, and their overall feeling is there needs to be some sort of reduction to give them a rest and enable them to be sort of in some sort of decent shape to perform. And then you got your white ball specialists, if you like, those that go around playing the sort of global T20 leagues that, again, have different opinions and different views on the world compared to your day in, day out county cricketer, I guess. So from our side, obviously trying to represent them all, it's not easy to get sort of one stance on exactly what things would look like. So that's where the survey came about. That's why we wanted to get some information and some thoughts from the whole of the player group. I think we've got well over 300 men's players completed the survey in pre-season, which gave us the data. And I think that the shocking numbers, if you like, or the ones that sort of sparked our concerns the most were definitely around the safety concerns around travelling, and that sort of concerns around physical well-being, 81%, and I think it was 62% concerns around their mental well-being, the relentlessness of the schedule, and those kind of things. So those are the numbers that really sparked us. And trying to get some solutions in there as well. I think players want 3 days leading up to a championship game, which I think is a good starting point, and they want that one rest day before a T20 game, so that enables them to be relatively fresh going into the season. And obviously, as Nick touched on as well, that has performance benefits as well as the welfare angle as well.
It's something you mentioned there, which I think is really important, in that there's such a plethora and wide range of places you can kind of pick at to say something's not working. And so where do you begin to kind of fix an issue as wide ranging as this? But as you mentioned there, when the increase of back-to-back fixtures was announced in the blast, in the room there was anger. And so surely there's things that would be nice to have and things that have to have. I know Nick's closest, both of you are closer to this than I am, but as someone on more of the outside, the thing that always sticks out to me when I read stuff about this is the sight of the image of a 23-year-old lad like belting down the M27 at 3 a.m., having just finished a blast game and having to get home, sleep, and play again the next day. That is, I don't mean this to sound crass, but that is literally a car crash waiting to happen. Is that kind of an area where, what can we address? What can we change? Okay, there are these massive overarching issues, but at the bare minimum, the minimum standards you mentioned, we want to stop back-to-back games, and that is something that can change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can almost extend that to sort of travel standards and things. I know Lancashire this year are offering a hotel when they get back to Old Trafford. I know that's not easy for everyone to do, or impossible for some to do, because they haven't got a hotel on site when they get back to the ground and stuff. But if players want it, there's a room on site if they get back past a certain time at night, which is obviously a huge duty of care towards their players from Lancashire. So salute them for that, certainly. I think bus travel is one thing that helps, but like you say, you get back at midnight or 1 a.m, 2 a.m, wherever you are, back to HQ. Some people still then have a 45-minute, an hour drive to wherever they live. So solves half the problem, if you like, rather than the full solution in that scenario. So travel safety and travel guidelines. We've had some pretty interesting stories last year of teams going around in sort of minivans, 6 to a van, and players driving themselves, which obviously is not elite level sport, and again, real concern to us in that scenario. So there's things that can be done without reducing cricket as well. So the travel standards is an obvious one, but also just within the blast this year, I think it's very much been just looked at solely through a commercial lens. And I think the danger of looking through one lens is it doesn't fit everyone. So obviously counties want their games on Thursday night, Friday nights, and Saturdays and Sundays, which is understandable, but there has to be some balance with that as well. Like basically the first half of the week's not utilised for a long period in the middle of the summer. So I think we've seen the danger of looking at things through one lens, through the high performance review. That was solely looking at high performance and not anything else. And that's why it fell down essentially, because it didn't suit the counties, it didn't suit members and actually even some players, or a lot of players, actually thought it was pretty drastic the amount that was going to cricket was going to be cut out of that in terms of the high performance review. So I think looking at things through one lens is always dangerous. It needs that collaborative approach and that sort of overarching view from all stakeholders. Obviously, players are very important. I would say that they're the most important for me, but members also the lifeblood of the counties. They're very important. Commercial side of things very important. Broadcast effectively pays everybody in the game's wages. That's also a really important consideration to make as well.
Nick, you've spoken to 70, 80 players about this over. But your number's not mine, and I always believe the numbers. What's the fit if these concerns aren't listened to? Like, okay, well, what is it? Just a case of like put up or shut up? Like, if you don't like it, well, someone else will play, or you stop playing. Like, what's the alternative? What could happen?
As in what, with inaction, or is that what you mean?
No. If players' concerns aren't addressed, what's the end game of that? Are players stopping to playing, or is it just a case of that they have to continue with the status quo?
Well, without speaking for Daryl's colleague, I interviewed James Harris back in must be November, December, and James is obviously chair of PCA, and so he's speaking for. It's not. I suspect this isn't just his view, but the reality of the way the game is changing, the shifting landscapes, and the increased opportunities for players in the franchise circuit, particularly as it expands, and the franchise circuit becomes something that isn't just for the blue, the top band of player. There was a time when you had to play, when it first started out in those first few years, it was the top players who'd done a certain amount of time and proving themselves in international cricket and all that kind of thing. But now there's so many opportunities for so many different kinds of player on the franchise circuit and different competitions, different level of competition, that James's view is that if you don't change this up, if you don't move with the times and adapt to what the game looks like at the moment outside of the UK, you end up with players looking at their contracts here and what they have to do to earn the money on that contract, and realise, particularly for a seamer, that there is probably a more sustainable way of earning the same living that is easier on your body, easier on your mind, and probably lets you travel the world as well. And I think that's the issue. I mean, if we look at, I think one of the sort of physical, say that the number of guys who highlighted the physical impact on of the schedule. If you get injured, so the way the blast is structured at the moment, if you get injured on let's say you get injured the second night of back-to-back games, you could do your hamstring, you could be out for 6 weeks, you could be a white ball only cricketer. Now that's your blast over. So your blast is done because it might not be because you've played 2 games in a row, but certainly that's not helping. And it's certainly not helping if you're driving yourself to that game. 6 weeks, that then could take you into the hundreds. You could miss part of the 100, you could miss most of the blast. That's your shop window. And if you miss your shop window, that's your winter. And if you miss your winter, that is an enormous earning opportunity gone. And this is a career, and the game has changed. There's a lot more money in the game than there once was. But those opportunities, if you are taking people into the red zone to play through the blast, because you want to win the blast, you want to win all these things. And as much as people can say, well, you could rotate your squad. Yeah, but these aren't Premier League football squads. You don't have a 25-man squad of players all at the same level, same experience.
Sorry, dude.
So,
they just have the most money.
So
if we give everyone the most money, then we've sorted. No problem.
But this is the thing, isn't it? Like if you there's that, you're stuck in between a rock and a hard place with rotation. You can rotate and not win, but at the end of the season say, well, the coach go to the CEO and say, well, actually, the players are really well, but you don't want to keep your job. Or you can go hell for leather and hope it all works, and hope everyone stays fit and just sort of trends well and isn't knackered and you go well. Otherwise, you but by doing that, you're not getting on their best, and that is where I think you'll have players who started to see players with white ball deals certainly look at it and go, well, actually, how can I do this better for myself? And chances are that doesn't involve the counties.
I think I agree in that. The main theme that seems to be coming out of this is like a desire for more time, basically.
There's one of the anecdotes. Can I just jump in on that? Like one of the anecdotes sure. I've heard a lot actually is that, and the thing that gets lost in this is practice days. So there's a difference between a rest day and a travel day and a practice day. A rest day in the middle, particularly of a very busy Champo block, let's say, you don't necessarily you do need to get away from the game at some point. but you also do need to practice. If you're an opening batter, you nick off the same way four times in April, let's say. You've got your opposition bowler for the next week, studying each one, then play. They know exactly what to do against you, but you don't have time to go and correct that because you're going from game to game, probably with a single day in between, and then with the travel day where, depending where you're playing, you spend a lot of it on a coach. You get there, and you might not be straight in the nets. So there's this. We look at the schedule, and we look at a short summer, and we look at the wall charts and stuff. Every gap is seen as an opportunity for cricket. But there doesn't need to be a gap where that is actually seen as an opportunity to be a gap, or you don't. Yeah, I think that's fair.
That plays in. It's the same thing. It's a desire for time. Everyone's after more time, and this is what Daryl, I think his official title is King of Cricket at Worcestershire, Ashley Giles, was saying the thing that people want to invent is just 2 more months just to fit this all in. And so you mentioned there earlier, what all players really want at the moment is a minimum standard break. They want a gap between fixtures. And that seems on the surface so simple, but there's an absence of time. So realistically, if we do add in these rest days, isn't the logical conclusion there that fixtures have to disappear? There has to be a reduction in county championship, Vitality Blast, or the One Day Cup.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, like I said before, I think there's things that you can do without any reduction, certainly, but ultimately you've got to try and create some space to allow these sort of rest periods and preparation periods, and to ultimately get the ultimate schedule. I mean, I don't know exactly what that is. I mean, people talk about reduction in championship, don't they, and how members particularly against that. I'm not completely sure what the members are against. Is it the number of fixtures or is it the number of days? Because obviously if you could play 16 3-day games, for example, which is a reduction, or you could play 12 5-day games, is actually an increase in number of days, but it's a reduction in the fixtures.
Speaking my language, Daryl.
So there's different ways to look at it and different ways to skin it out. I think what we're trying to say is we need to have a look at it. We need to have a proper look at it and get input from all stakeholders to try and get something that's better than is now. Because I think probably all pretty much agreed across. I speak to DOCs and directors of cricket and CEOs and directors of cricket. They're the same thing, DOCs and cricket, aren't they? CEOs, directors of cricket. Even I pop down to Worcester and speak to members, and they're not particularly happy of how the county championship book ended and things like that. So I think there's a general sort of view that there is room for improvement. It's just how we get to that, and I think it needs a good look. And I think for us, I think having those rest days that we talked about, those gaps between fixtures, is probably a decent place to start. And what could a season look like with those in place?
You mentioned there kind of like the PCA talking to everyone. Where does the PCA actually sit in the kind of power rankings in the hallways of cricket? Like, are you guys the premier voice? Is what you say kind of the leading point? Does that define the agenda? Or do you feel that there are greater powers than you kind of like preventing the change that you want?
Yeah,
or different powers. Yeah,
there's definitely greater powers than us. I can guarantee that is
justice for the PCA.
I mean, I think where we do work well with the ECB, we have a seat on most tables. At most, I can go. There's a lot of acronyms of different working groups and committees that I or Rob, my CEO, sits on. But yeah, we have a voice and we get to put our input in. I think a big part of our work is understanding what the players think. A big part of my work is going around the counties and the regions and understanding what players think, what they want. And then being the player voice, etc., at the ECB and with the counties in player working group or professional game committee or whatever it might be. So there's definitely a voice, and I like to think we're listened to on a lot of stuff, and we work with the ECB pretty well in terms of collaborating them on certain things. But in terms of power, I think ultimately, in terms of the schedule, it's the county chairs, isn't it? Constitutionally, it's their vote and what they want, and obviously they're put in place by 15 out of the 18 are put in place by county members. So that constitutionally, that's where the power lies in terms of being able to change things.
I jokingly mentioned this to Nick at the top of the show about there's this kind of idea of this issue being kind of like the union rep is saying my lads are working too hard. Like give him a break, and everyone's kind of like that's a tale that's been heard over decades and throughout history. Like, what is your reply to people who have that kind of I don't want to say simplistic response because that just kind of potentially anchors the answer. But yeah, what is your response to that criticism where it's you guys are just asking for the same cash for less work?
Well, I think the answer's in the numbers, isn't it? If you look at the injury surveillance report in certain peak points of the season, the ECB's work around at the back end of, certainly last year, at the back end of that long sort of championship block, there was a massive spike in injuries, and at certain pinch points during the T20 Blast, when there was back-to-back games, there were spiking injuries. So the numbers sort of speak for themselves in that. And interestingly, during the 100 and the one-day cup, when the games are more spread out and people have rest and recuperation time and practice time, shock that the number of injuries falls off a cliff effectively. So the evidence is there in terms of physical welfare. Certainly, what perhaps people don't see in that there 10% of our members last year sought mental health support through our partner Sport and Chance that I mentioned. So that's quite a big number of cricketers that are seeking that report. And I don't know the details. It's all obviously confidential and you don't know exactly what's going on, but I'd imagine there's a lot of that. Looking by the survey and some of the comments made on the survey, a lot of that's due down to sort of the relentless nature and the inability to get away from cricket in certain parts of the year. So I think there's certainly some evidence around that as well. So yeah, and in terms of the financial side of it, look, I think county cricket salaries haven't gone up since 2019. In the reality, we see the total salary payments, the numbers from all the counties. They're pretty much stagnant across the board. The reality is, in real terms, obviously, we all know about the sort of cost of living and inflation and things like that. Actually, cricketers who are purely on a county salary and not playing in these tournaments are worse off now than they were 5 years ago. That's the reality of it.
It might be harder. I guess it's harder for there to be an official PCA statement saying players want to play less fixtures. There wants to be a reduction in fixtures in a more official sense. But the numbers also said that 60 cents, 2/3 believe there should be overall less cricket. Kind of, Nick, when you talk to players, it's such a bizarre kind of hotspot of debate when we talk about reducing fixtures, because my kind of general question would be, and I don't know if this can be answered, is the idea is that the reason why counties don't want to lose fixtures is financial. A large reason is that we can't lose T20 fixtures because we'll lose money. The members don't want to lose county championship fixtures because we lose X or Y or whatever. Money from the 100 is meant to be kind of plugging that gap. So surely if there's a situation where counties are financially more sustainable as a result of the 100, there's the potential to reduce the T20 Blast, for instance, which has a 14-game group stage. The only other competition in the world that has that many games is the IPL. And then it has a 7-week break until they play the quarterfinals. Kind of, Nick, from when you talk to players, is there a desire to genuinely say, we just think these tournaments are too long from a pragmatic point of view, as well as physical?
Genuinely, every single player you speak to has caveats everything with the turkey voting for Christmas, cutting off your nose to spite your face. Like, no one wants to not play cricket.
Okay, that's interesting.
It's genuinely there is nuance to all of it. And there was a great line from someone who said to me, players were probably asked to do stuff that was far more mental in the 80s and 90s. That doesn't make it. That doesn't mean the correct answer is get on with it. Like, it can have been mental then as well as it is now. The fact that it was mad back then doesn't mean it should be mad now. And I think it is probably say there probably is certainly more of a these two major points, player welfare and high performance. I don't think it's controversial to say that there probably is in general in modern day 2024 sports a greater eye on both those things than perhaps there were 40 years ago. I mean, no one doesn't want to play cricket, and genuinely a lot of the guys I've spoken to have said it's really hard because these are the issues, but at the same time I don't have a solution, and I know how hard it is, and everyone knows why it's hard, for the reasons you say there, blast money, members' commitment to, the county's commitment to the championship, where we lie with much of August being ring fenced. Like, it is really hard. I think they should. This doesn't help the issue because it just lengthens the season. But October is no worse than April, as weather-wise, and So I suspect the last thing anyone wants to do is drag out the season any longer. But there are, but yeah, like no one doesn't want to play, and no one has come out, no one has come in like a bull in the china shop and said we need to change this, because everyone does know that it is not that simple. And if there was a way of having a utopian schedule, we would have it already. Which I think, as well as there being a lot of frustration with the way things are, I think there is quite a bit of sympathy for Alan Fordham, who is the guy at the ECB who's faced with presenting the schedule. It must be the most impossible Tetris to sort of work through. Like when you get through, because we're sitting here talking about the player's perspective, there are so many stakeholders, and there are genuine reasons. There'll be a concert at this ground on that night, and there'll be a Flint game, that needs to be played at a ground on a certain day. There'll be a double header that county and region want to play on this particular day. There'll be an England game, there'll be an England pathway game, a Select 11 game that all need grounds. I cannot fathom how tough a job it is. And I cannot fathom how early in the season it must start as well, which I think is another reason that when we sort of look ahead to next year, it's really hard to say there'll be much significant change. You've got the 100 that's not sorted yet, but then you've also got these ongoing conversations when, presumably, if you're trying to work it out by October, you can't just sit down for an afternoon and knock it all into a spreadsheet.
But so we've been talking for half an hour now. Like, I'd like to try and move on to some sense of like solutions, as what Nick Howson was saying, our producer, boss, leader, kind of before, like the whole idea that you can't present a criticism if you don't present a solution. One thing, but quickly before we go, something I didn't realise until the last couple of years working in this sport. Nick mentioned their counties needing to do Overlord, please, says Nick coming into the chat as we're watching. Is how much counties rely on music concerts, and kind of this joke that like kind of Michael Bublé funds the English county summer basically isn't kind of too far from like the reality. But like Daryl, when we're talking about this, like we're talking about this big problem, and we have spoken about it in terms of like the union context. What action could follow if players aren't listened to? Is there potential down the line for a strike? Could people say we don't want to play anymore? Like, how is there a potential breaking point where the PCA will say you guys have to listen to this and it has to be fixed now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're a long way off any sort of strike action and things like that. I think, like I say, there's obviously, and potentially, I think obviously the opinions split a lot across the player group as well. So getting consensus on a majority that wanted to strike, I think, is probably unrealistic. I don't think that will happen. But
hell of a news line.
Yeah, I think sorry if I'm losing your headline there. Sorry about that. But
none of us like news here at the group anyway.
I think Nick's point previously is actually right. Obviously, with players have more choice than ever before now, certainly, and you've seen over the last couple of years where different tournaments are encroaching on our summer. Major League Cricket, most recently, probably. Obviously, Caribbean Premier League's been there a little while. We haven't really lost too many players to that. We haven't lost any players, I don't think, to that, other than the white ball specialist popping in for the odd game. But I think there's talk about PSL potentially sort of running alongside the IPL at the start of the year. Obviously, we've had a lot of players playing that competition over the years. Obviously, that become more difficult once it's sort of at the start of our summer. But it does give players another choice. Now, I think my overriding sort of thought or overriding view that I'm getting from players that players still want to play for England. Players still want to play red ball cricket and do well. That's where a lot of players see sort of the legacy within the game is playing red ball cricket and playing in Ashes series and things like that. But that can only go so far. If you keep pushing players to the max and it's not a particularly well-paid county cricket compared to the franchise leagues around the world, at some point people are going to start drawing a line and saying, do you know what? I'm not going to play for England now. I've got to 26, 27. I'm not there yet. I'll just go and play in the PSL at the early part of the year. I'll play in the MLC later on in the year, and I'll play in the 100. And we'll push them away from county cricket, which is my biggest fear, actually, because I am a traditionalist. I love my county cricket. Grew up on county cricket, watching it. Obviously, spent a lot of time playing it, and I say this internally a lot at the PCA and try and educate players. And as well, I think the way the game flourishes in this country is by having high quality England teams, both men and women's teams, who are winning games of cricket and leading on the world stage, and then a vibrant domestic structure underpinning it. That's good for everyone, and particularly for players, because if you're playing in a vibrant domestic schedule, whether that's county cricket or the 100, then everyone benefits. Spectators will benefit, counters will benefit, and that's where we've got to try and get to as a game, in my view.
Daryl, can I ask quickly, just on the point of the opportunities coming to the game? Do you see? Obviously, we've seen white ball deals, but do you see the game becoming more do you see contracts becoming more specialised to the point where you don't know where most counties almost do have sort of a red ball side and a white ball side?
Potentially, I think it obviously does depend on finance. We've seen it. Yeah. Surrey this year in particular, there's been a couple that have gone on really sort of short term half blast contracts, is it, or 6 to 7 games, whatever, 6 to 8 games. That's something that wasn't around a couple of years ago. Even Hales is doing something similar at Notts, isn't he, and going and playing in Sri Lanka. So I don't think we're looking at that sort of in the mainstream, if you like, but I do think there are players around the edges now that are looking at that and starting to play in that. I do think we're going towards particularly people in their late 20s, early 30s who are away from, probably a long way from playing from England at that point. I think there are players that are looking at it thinking, is it worth the time and effort, time away from home in terms of 4 or 5 days at a time playing championship cricket when I could spend a bit more time at home during the English summer and essentially make their money in other tournaments around the world, as well as the Blast and the 100, so to speak. I do think we're seeing a trend of players, particularly at that sort of age bracket, move in that direction, or sort of edging towards that direction, I should say.
I feel like there's kind of 2 parts here. And this is my words, not the PCA's. There's the idea that the schedule is dangerous and the idea that it's dumb. And the dangerous bit is what could get addressed in the short term, which is the travel, the need for rest, injuries, kind of playing whatever, and the idea that it's dumb. And I don't mean this to sound hyperbolic, although it might do. From like my perspective, the counties play 3 forms of cricket in this country, and all 3 in their own way are kind of corrupted. I think it shows how low cricket sits in the kind of national consciousness, that we're content with our Premier level of cricket being a league where teams don't play each other twice. The last 2 seasons, the top 2 teams competing for the title have played each other once. And can you imagine if in the next 2 weeks the Premier League was about to end and Man City and Arsenal just played each other once and there was 2 points between them and a win could flip that over? It's a bizarre nonsense which is kind of unique to cricket, or unique to English cricket at least. And quickly, before people say, in the NFL, kind of you don't have to finish top to win the league or whatever, you don't play everyone once. That goes into a playoff system. It's the same with the AFL. You don't play everyone twice, but you then go into a final system. We don't have that. We have this merit system. And yes, we're a bit more comfortable with it because there's rain about. But to bake that into our league, I think is crazy. Then you go on to the T20 Blast. We have the longest group stage in the world alongside the IPL, which is criticised for being too long. And after 7 weeks of competition, all you needed to do to qualify for the next round was finish 4th out of 9. And then you have to wait 7 weeks to then pick up the storyline again, and potentially you're knocked out in a home quarter final. You have no real reward for winning the group. And then the one day cup, no one good plays in it. Sorry, everyone, because they're all playing the 100 basically. Or like it's the second, like there's a horrible situation where we've created this schedule where each of the 3 competitions have reasons not to watch them and not to be able to follow a storyline. I know this is my personal solution, which is my hot take. I'd love to go to a three tiers of 6, and I'd go 4 days on a rest day, or just 5-day matches. As you said, Daryl, it's a case of, is it matches or is it days? And 5 home matches of 5 days is 25 days of home cricket versus 28 days of home cricket. 7 times 4 over the last few years. A third or 40% of county championship matches are drawn, and there's no kind of like potential for results. Weather's more erratic. That would be my solution. Nick, you're potentially going into October. Daryl, do you have is there a favourite choice from players? Do players have a preference here in terms of when you're chatting around the bar or in the clubhouse or in the changing room afterwards? This would be the way I'd do it. This is the way I'd like to see there to be change.
Again, I think I'm sort of repeating myself a little bit, but it is split. I think there are certain elements. I sort of talked about the sort of differentials we've got in types of cricket. I think it depends on who you are, not just in terms of what you play and your skill set, but also where you play. So if you're at one of the bigger counties that have got a massive squad, for example, then you've got a lot more specialists, and you tend to almost want to play more cricket in truth. And then obviously, if you're at one of the smaller counties with a smaller size squad, then you get wheeled out day in day out. Then you want a reduction across everything in truth. So trying to get consensus is a real challenging aspect for us. But I think that's probably the next stage for us, is to try and work out exactly what the majority think the schedule should, in terms of the structure of all the competitions, etc. I think one thing that did come out was 50 over cricket behind the 100 was thought to be probably not perfect, but probably the best format behind that, because I don't think there's very little appetite for a second division 100 at this point. Was something that was discussed around the tables a lot during the pre-season meetings, and that was certainly something that players generally weren't particularly keen on overall, certainly the vast majority anyway.
Is the feeling that the 100 has created this issue, or is it the 100 has exacerbated it? I think that's the right word. Because as we said at the top of the show, players, the schedule's been a problem for forever, basically.
Yeah, I think it's probably exasperated it. I think that's probably fair. I think actually, if you take the 100 out and you've got the one day cup, we probably would have played those 8 one-day games at the start of the season, so everything's just sort of concertinaed up into the rest of the season anyway, I suppose. But it's probably has exaggerated it slightly, because it's probably a 4 or 5 week window in the middle rather than potentially a 3 week window at the start. So it probably maybe has sort of added to the issue, certainly.
Daryl, how wedded to blocks are you still? I mean, I guess one way you could create a more, without blocks, you could create a more consistent schedule that was, as Cam said, sort of easier to follow. If you played this is all very hypothetical, but you could play Champo Sunday to Wednesday with a regular Friday night blast match or something along those lines. And then you've obviously got August being August with 100 and the one day cup. But we all know the benefits to blocks, and obviously players' preferences around them and overseas availability, etc. But don't know, is that as wedded to that now as the game was 5-6 years ago?
Probably not. I don't think. I think certainly if you 3, 4, 5 years ago, then players were adamant that everything skill development wise had to be in blocked format. I do still think that there's an element of players not particularly liking going back to Championship cricket for 2 weeks in the middle of the blast this year. I think that's certainly a problem. But it sort of goes back to my point before around sort of collaboration and understanding. I think there's probably more of an understanding now that, right, this is really tricky. Part of the pre-season is actually we got them to sit on tables in small groups and discuss what an ideal structure of a summer should be in terms of what should be played when and how it would all work. And it's interesting. I think if we failed to get a consensus on what it should look like, we certainly got consensus of how bloody difficult it was to try and piece it all together. So, and I think players probably got a better understanding than ever off the back of that, how tricky that is to sort of piece together. So I think there's probably a better understanding now that there maybe have to be some sacrifice. It's like with any negotiation, right? If everyone goes home mildly disappointed, you've probably got to a pretty good result, and that probably might be an area that players are probably willing to give on.
Nick, if you're waving a magic wand, I've already solved it. I could tell I'll solve it no problem in the next 20 minutes if we had more time. But what would be your solution, Nick?
I don't really know. I mean, I'd not really thought about your 5-day solution, but I quite like it because of the day of cricket, because of the days of cricket thing. I think if so much is so hypothetical, isn't it? Like, I think you have 10-game group. I think you have a 10-game blast group stage, but I'd say this discounts all the financial stuff and the reasons we know. The counties really want 7. If you play 10 blast group games, you can play everyone at home and your local rival. I think I've got that maths. No, I haven't. Know what I'm talking about. You play everyone once. That's it. No, sorry, hang on, what am I doing? 8 games. You play everyone once, and then you play your 2 local rivals twice. So you retain that bit of commercial, financial opportunity for that second local game. And then that gives you back 4 days, which gives you back 4 travel days, hopefully, which gives you 8 days in total. And suddenly you've got a whole week that you can drop into the schedule however you want to. If you've got 8 days to put individually behind 8 games to create an extra rest day, or you create a kind of like half-term thing in the middle of at some point in the summer where no one plays for a week and recharges. I prefer that, I think, to reducing the championship. And if that 100 money does come in and does get split across the 18 counties, then you'd hope that the need for 14 Blast group games is reduced some way. Bear in mind, the only reason there are 14 IPL group games is for the broadcast deal, an enormous broadcast deal. The Blast doesn't have that, so it's really hard to justify it beyond that top line for the county. So if there is a way of helping that out, then I don't know. I feel like that clears a week in the schedule. As I said earlier, players aren't asking for heaven and earth. They're not asking for a radical overhaul or starting again. It's funny, we've written a lot about it. We're talking a lot about it, but it is tweaks people are asking for, not radical start again. This is nonsense.
3 divisions of 6, 5-day matches. Bottom 6 gets relegated, first goes up, 2nd and 5th player playoff, first 2 and Div 1 player final. It'd be fantastic, because the problem is, if it's only 4 days, you go, we can't play 10 matches because we lose too much time to rain. That's why you have the extra day, you have the reserve day. Daryl, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask you for your magic wand answer. If you want to just say that my idea is official PCA policy, I'm more than happy for you to take that on board. But yeah, I am going to ask you, if you had a magic wand, what would be the one change you can have for next year? Or the 2026, whenever it be.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is definitely not PCA policy or the majority view of the players, because the fact is we probably haven't got one. But I think if you looked at the schedule this year in terms of creating some space in the T20 Blast period, there's 2 4-day games in there. If you move those, spread the games out, T20 Blast games out there, then you've probably got a very good schedule. Is my view. Although I do like the 5-day games, 10 5-day games as well. So I do quite enjoy that, particularly with a player. And then you might get a result with a cookable ball in that case as well.
Exactly. See, we're tying it in. We'll get Rob Key involved. Oh my goodness me! I'm so excited. I can't believe I'm the main administrator of English cricket. That's great. Right. That's it for this week. Daryl, thank you very much. Nick, thank you very much. We'll be back next week. This was more of a specialist episode where we focused in on one topic in particular. Please let us know if you liked it. If you didn't like it, please do not let us know. We'd rather live in peace. Daryl, thank you again very much. Nick, thank you again very much. Before we go, you must always know that nobody covers county cricket like the Cricketer, and you can get access to our coverage of all 18 teams online from as little as £3.99 a month. Our own top team of county championships have now won the outstanding online coverage of Domestic Cricket Prize at the ECB Domestic Cricket Journalism Awards for six years running, so you don't have to take our word for it. Thank you very much, everyone, and we will see you and speak to you next week.